I'm not sure how much was said about Boots before I came on stage, but if you know anything about him, you know he is like me, you know, a Renaissance man, someone who's worked through a whole multitude of disciplines, through music into filmmaking by way of producing and screenwriting, as well as some of the social activism, which I'm really interested in hearing some more about. And now he has his debut movie, Sorry to Bother You, which I saw on Monday, just in case you were wondering if I was one of those journos who hasn't even seen the flipping film and then starts asking questions they don't know about. And it's going to be screening later here tonight. Before we go any further, just make him feel warm and welcome. It's the one and only Boots Riley. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, obviously we're gonna get into the film in a bit, but I just wanted to rewind a little bit because of just the range of stuff that's happened in your life and the stuff that you've achieved. So I wanted to go back even before the Coup, even before music, and I wanted to understand, like, pre-93, pre your first release, who was like the young Boots Riley and what was going on for you at that stage in your life as a young adult?
Yeah, well, I had gotten involved in organizing starting when I was 14. By the time I was 15, I had joined a radical communist organization called Progressive Labor Party and was helping farm workers in Central California Valley to organize a farm workers union called the Anti-Racist Farm Workers Union, and I was spending summers doing that. But at the same time, I was involved in theater. I was like writing school plays, and somewhat involved in music. And yeah, then Spike Lee happened, and I went to film school. And so
what year are we talking about here? Like 87?
Well, when I went to film school, I graduated high school in 88, right. And so I started going to film school later in 89, and around those times. But I was doing everything from being involved in radical organizations to doing music and theater, and then also like throwing parties, that were kind of the antithesis of all that, where we had dress codes and all that sort of stuff.
And this is Oakland. This is Oakland.
Oakland,
right?
Yeah. So kind of a little bit of everything. Selling weed. I had a moped that I would ride around with no muffler on it, and then that's how people knew I was in the area.
Couple pages.
Yeah. So people would page me when they heard car alarms going off because of the muffler.
So you were kind of multi-dimensional, multifaceted even before being a professional in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of ways to talk about it, which is like something about like trying to reach beyond the world that you just see around you and figure out like what creates that world and how do you have any power in it. And those are different ways of doing that, which is, being involved in trying to organize a movement that struggles around those issues, and then also just trying to physically be connected to other places and other things and get outside of there.
What made you that kind of dude? Because that fascinates me what you're saying. Because like where I grew, excuse me, I grew up on like a council estate. Something in my throat. It's like the equivalent. I don't want to say the equivalent of the projects. It's a lot smaller, but you know what I'm saying. It's like a government housing.
Yeah, I've seen movies.
But different.
Yeah, no, I'm just. I've seen it in movies.
What, council estates seem
Yeah,
British.
yeah.
Okay,
like,
cool,
what's that?
Cool.
Fish Tank? Is that a council estate?
Fish Tank. Yeah. I always think Americans never watch those kind of films.
Well, I watch
That's my own
films,
racism.
so yeah.
But yeah, you know, there'll be certain people who always felt that way. You know, that there's something more, there's more to gain than just living in this small square radius and what goes on in and around the blocks. So what was it that made you at such an early age think, well, actually, there's all this other stuff going on?
But I don't know, I disagree with that. I think that we end up putting the actions of certain groups of folks into that. Like, so what we're talking about is kind of almost an existential crisis. Like, you know, what is my life about? How do I make it
the
about
life
more?
script that you give yourself that
Right.
like this is shit.
And so we kind of end up, certain people's images get conscripted to this one thing. Like, oh, if they're selling weed or they're selling dope, it's because they're thinking too small, or they don't care about anything. They're just, you know, thinking, you know, check to check. But in reality, we work with the analysis that we have been given. So for some people, that's like, oh, I'm gonna rap. And matter of fact, so many people rap. I mean, any of the, you know, like I've never lived in a council estate, but I bet you that a lot of people had some sort of thing that they were doing, rapping or trying to hustle this or hustle that, or like everybody's working with an idea of how the world works and how they might advance in that world, in which is some sort of idea of their life being bigger. It might even be like, oh, I can get this job and one day become the manager and then I get transferred over there. But it's based on the analysis that they're given, and until we have movements that get people involved where they are and show where the power is, they're going to have this analysis that's skewed that makes them feel that way. I guess what I'm saying is I believe most people have that drive. They have that want at the very least. And whether it turns into a drive or not has to do with, like mine kind of became a drive that had steps in it and things like that because I got involved with things that taught me that. Like, so, you know, getting involved in a disciplined revolutionary organization, there's an idea of dialectical materialism, which, you know, out of many things, one of the things it basically says is that everything is changing. Everything is always changing. Even that the rock or this thing right here is deteriorating right now. There's nothing that's standing still. And you can have something to say with how that thing is changing. And not only that, whatever it is that you want to get to, all you have to do is is correctly analyze it and define the steps that it takes to get there. And with those sorts of ideas comes ideas of critique and self-critique and how you figure out things and how you assess what things are. And so I had that framework and I could get things done.
Do you have siblings?
Yes.
So did your brothers and sisters have a similar outlook?
Well, I don't think so because, my oldest sister is 11 years older than me. And,
right.
You know, I have a older brother and sister on my mother's side, then an older sister on my father's side. I mean, you know, so we all didn't all grow up in the same household and things like that.
Okay.
So,
So which came first, the rap or activism, and how did they sort of play off each other? I'm talking sort of.
Well, I think when I was 11, I wanted to be Prince, and even though I was taking guitar, piano, and trumpet, I wanted to be Prince without practicing as much as Prince had to practice.
That makes a lot of sense. That would be hard.
And I just wanted, you know, and there was this thing, and it's connected to what I was saying. It's like this thing of, and I wouldn't have identified it then, but now I see that we're all told that we aren't important, that we aren't shit, we can't do anything, but who we see that is important are the people on TV, are the stars, and so you want to. It's that same yearning. You want your life to mean something and be about something. So I wanted to do that, but then later, as I said, once I was about 14, I started getting involved in these organizations that were fighting to change things, and became, you know, shortly after that, a committed revolutionary. And I felt like, at first I felt like those earlier goals were very individualistic, that it was just about me wanting to get famous or wanting to have attention or whatever. But I realize now that it was part of the same thing. Once I started becoming an organizer and helping with some of these movements, I started feeling like I was contributing to something that was having an effect on history. And I felt powerful, even, you know, like just being part of that process. And what it was part of that same yearning. Mm-hmm. And it's part of what gets people involved in, you know, I've seen many different campaigns where people get involved all at once, and it feels like you are part of the world, and that all of a sudden your life means something.
Was there anything that you were involved in that had, you know, that resonated outside of California, that maybe hit national press?
Not at first. I mean, the first thing that I got involved with was after being involved in these summer projects with farm workers. I came back to Oakland, and in high school they were trying to make us have year-round school, and that's the easiest campaign to get students involved in fighting.
Like no breaks.
Yeah, like no breaks. So that was like, you know, but there would be breaks, but they would just be broken up throughout the year. And the reason was
no
to
save,
no big summer, and just a few weeks here, a few weeks there. And the idea behind it was that through doing this, they could put people on tracks, save money on books, and, you know, and there were these big budget cuts that would happen. But in reality, what they were doing was putting people into tracks. So as soon as you entered into 9th grade, they'd decide whether you were going to go to college or not through testing, and put you into the track where you got whatever classes they decided would benefit you, and your fate was decided at that point. So, and they did it at all the schools except for the school at the time, which was the mainly white school, which was called Skyline, and so we called, using kind of the stuff that I've been through helping these farm workers. We called for a walkout, for a strike, and 2,000 of the 2,200 students walked out, and we marched down to the about 2 or 3 miles to the school board's offices. And as we were marching, word got out to other schools, so other high schools started walking out. But by the time we got there, the head of the school district came out and read a statement saying, okay, we're not going to do year-round schools. Basically, you win. And so we all like cheered and got drunk with power. Like, wow, this is how easy it is? What? How come we haven't been doing this the whole time? And because of that, though, like then I got singled out by the principal, who was an ex-cop, this buff dude that like instilled physical fear into everybody, and you know, he went on the intercom saying, Raymond Riley is a communist who wants to take us back to the days of the Black Panther Party,
Wow.
all this kind of stuff. Don't listen to him. And the truth is, even though we're in Oakland, California, this is the 80s, and like 10 years is a long time, 5 years is a long time, we didn't really know who the Black Panther Party was. And it was through that I decided to start looking it up. But because it was successful, different organizations from around the country started flying me out to speak to students about the strike that was happening.
You individually?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And how old are you at this point?
15 or 16.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I was going around and doing interviews, and it was because other youth organizations were trying to think about ways that they could affect change. So I was just going around talking to people, and then other people were trying it. So I think that was definitely something that gave me an early idea that, okay, maybe if I hadn't done this thing, to get that strike going, there were many people involved in just the core organizing of it. But maybe if I hadn't done this thing, there's something that would have been different about my life and other people's lives. And then other people were getting inspiration from what I was doing. So I got a chance early on to see that, the things that I did mattered.
And did that give you that sort of additional boost of confidence to think that, public speaking is something I can do, rapping is something I can do
I think, that definitely
had. I never be serious about rap.
Oh, yeah, and I was also doing theater, so I think also what was going on at the time is I was trying to get my friend Johnny to come to more meetings and rallies and stuff, and so I would always be like, hey, man, you'll be able to get... He was a serious rapper, like, could just, like Supernatural or something like that, just always freestyling or whatever. And, so I was like, if you come... you could, do a rap, and there's people there, and there'll be like hundreds of people. Usually there, at that time in the 80s, there was probably like 30 people we'd be like, wow, that was a victory. And there'd be 30 people there. And, and so he'd just be like, well, I'm only going to do it if you're my hype man, and if you rap too. So I started doing that in order to just get him to come to the rallies.
Right.
And then from there, at the same time, I was writing plays, and I wrote a version of the West Side Story for our high school, which was in East Oakland, called East Side Story. And and the request was that it be raps instead of songs. So I wrote these raps, and when they were performed, people didn't boo. So I was like, oh, maybe
That's enough.
Maybe I could do it. But also just me getting up at that time and just telling the story of what happened, and not understanding, people keep, when it gets to this part of the story, people get hyped, or people are feeling the tension when I get to this part of the story, and just seeing that in different parts of the country and seeing what people connect to. I think that definitely had a big effect on me feeling like even if I did have some hesitance about getting on stage and doing things, it made me feel that it was important.
What was your hesitance?
I don't know. I'm just saying, I think anybody, if they haven't done it before, they worry about doing something wrong. They worry about it not working or this or that. But when you have this extra thing of, well, what I'm doing is important and needs to be done, then that feeling becomes a lot less important, and a lot less of a factor than this bigger thing.
Yeah, so you felt you had a drive, Yeah. I had a similar journey into rap. When I started rapping, my biggest problem with myself was I didn't feel like I had anything to say. I was just rapping because I wanted to rap. It wasn't until years later. So you had that drive already. What happened to Johnny? Did he end up in the Coup?
No. He moved to. His problem was he was dedicated to freestyle. So he wanted somebody to sign him.
You can't make an album out of freestyle.
Yeah, he wanted to just freestyle the album, and he was like dedicated to it like a religion.
Yeah, and so that's why Johnny's just Johnny.
Yeah,
still.
But his name was Julius T. Poet, and that was his rap name. And actually, I would help him because he was trying to get these folks to sign him. Probably people don't know here, but I would be helping him carry crates in for this other rapper named MC Ant. And this other dude, Pooh Man, and we'd be carrying crates, and it was mainly so that he could get to rap that night, But I was his friend. I'm carrying the crates with them, and but just seeing the inner workings. There was a dude that had the money that probably sold some dope or whatever, and he had the sound equipment and rented out the place, and then there were the other people that helped him out, and then they were trying to they got a record press and I went and bought the record, and it was like the person that I would see every Friday when we would go help them. There's a record right here, and I could put it on the record player, and you can make a record. A person can make a record, not like somebody way out there.
No, that's a huge moment.
And
to be able to see the possibility of achievement right there in your hand.
Yeah.
And so I'm presuming, I don't know, but did you found the Coup?
Yeah.
So what's the timeline here after this moment? You've held this record in your hand. The other members, putting them together from here to, 93, the release of the first album. What are we looking at?
I think, I talked about it a lot. Like, yeah, I'm gonna make this or that. I think a couple times I had gone. One time I went into a studio and I'd say I had like $50, and I was like, I'm gonna pay for studio time. I went to a studio and I got there and I was like, okay, I'm ready to rap. And they were like, what do you mean? Like, I just thought that you go into a studio and you start rapping, because I had seen Crush Groove and they're in the studio and they're rapping, and so we spent all of that $50 like trying to, plug away and make a bass line on a keyboard. I didn't know how to do it. Later on, I figured out how to do it, but I still hadn't made anything. I was talking a lot and I just kept saying it to a point where, if I didn't do it, I would look like a liar, right? and so I just kept saying, yeah, I'm gonna make a record. And I was working at UPS, and there was another rapper that ended up becoming famous and selling platinum records that was working there at the time, Spice One, and he at the time he became famous as a quote unquote gangster rapper, but at the time he was in a group with a guy named Del the Funky Homo Sapien, who was Ice Cube's cousin, and so all of this stuff was happening. We were working at UPS, and I just was like, one day it was New Year's Eve going into 1991, and I just said, look, I gotta do this year. So I went through the phone book. This is the phone book days. And I looked up music studio and decided whatever music studio would open up the next day, that's the one I was gonna go to. And I found this music studio that would open up the next day, and called my boy E-Rock, who I worked with at UPS with, and was like, hey, you wanna go to the studio? Because he had a car. And so we went to the studio, and on the way to the studio, I was like, man, you should be in the group too.
You'd be a very valued member.
Yeah. And so he ended up being in the group, and that's how it happened.
So you managed to get yourself a deal, get this first album out, and it drops in 93, right? Like halfway through 93.
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, we signed in 92, and yeah, it came out.
So you guys just came and set out your stall early in terms of like the imagery that you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like name checking and like, virtue signaling.
Yeah.
With things, and I feel like this album was a lot of that. It was like a pamphlet on tape or on record or whatever, and which was okay, but after that I decided, there were a lot of phrases that I was using in this that kind of just said like, this is the team we're on and all that, and I didn't think it was doing what I needed to do. So after this album, my writing style changed.
Yeah, and I mean, I couldn't see the progression necessarily at the time because this album, I'm not gonna lie, it passed me by. But 94, I was 16.
Wait, okay, I didn't.
And
know.
that was my year in terms of hip hop.
All right,
like, but like, I know that I'm that bit younger, but I'm so glad I was 15 and 16 in 93 and 94 because hip hop wise, I don't know if I've had a better year in terms of the shit I was listening to. When you think like when Dig It came out, when that first album came out, and you got, you're up against Tribe, like Midnight Marauders, and you think of all the big albums that dropped in 93, and then 94, Illmatic and Ready to Die, seminal rap was coming out. But I still remember Genocide and Juice, and I remember it standing on its own 2 feet, even though most people here didn't really know what it was. Yeah. Because it was a weird one, because over here, like Doggy Style and everything that Dre had been doing in 92, and and even Strictly for My Niggas was 93 as well, so Pac had sort of burst on the scene. And over here it was like, it's New York or it's Cali, and there's this vibe or there's that vibe. It's either this gangster shit with the lolos or it's this stick 'em up kids, hustlers in New York.
Never really had a.
Whereas I remember hearing people describing you guys as gangster rap, or describing you guys as like this really worthy, socially conscious, Public Enemy type group. And then when I heard Genocide and Juice, I was like, but some of this shit's like party music. Some of it's like Pimp's freestyle. It's like some of it's funny as fuck, Yeah. It's a real range. And I think maybe that's what confused a lot of people who dipped in and out of rap. Yeah. Whereas I was one of those psychos who listened to everything.
A lot of music is identity politics, like in the sense of it's saying this is the tribe, this is what you wear, this is what you and there's a need for that to a certain extent, and for better or worse, I never was able to do that because like different influences would creep in, different things that I wanted to talk about or how I wanted to talk about it, and just to keep myself interested, because I wasn't good at sounding like what you're supposed to sound like.
Right.
Like I did really want to sound like Ice Cube at one point. I really wanted to, and I couldn't pull it off, and but so I knew that I couldn't copy whatever was out there, and so I just had to go do it however I thought would work.
And how did you, did you feel, just the more I think about those 2 years that spanned your first 2 albums, did you feel, you didn't feel intimidated at all, or did you just feel inspired by the level of good shit that was coming out? Because the more I think about it, it's like Wu-Tang as well and East Coast.
Yeah, you just feel like, oh, okay, that's what you're saying, here's what I'm saying. You get hyped about it. Right. And
just being a part of the conversation.
Yeah, and I hear from a lot of, there definitely are periods where you hear from a lot of folks that were coming out at that time, like later, they're like, oh man, I'm not writing anything because nothing else is inspiring me. And it's, that's kind of weird because you know, what they mean is nothing else is coming out like the other stuff or that was close to what they were doing, because music had maybe changed and moved into other areas. But, you know, artists want to feel like they're in conversation.
Yeah, and that's one of the beauties of rap as well, in that you almost can literally be in conversation when you're creating and performing your art, because of the nature of the rhythmic speech. So listen, I'm aware. I knew this was gonna be a risk. If you put two rappers together on stage, you're just gonna fucking talk about rap for hours. I knew this was gonna be a risk, and obviously you got this movie that everybody's talking about coming out. But just before we get into that, I was interested to see that in 2012 you had an album with the same title.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and then we have a soundtrack with that same title.
Yeah, so I started to get mad confused, because I was on Apple Music, like listening to the stuff that passed me by. Because like I said, I was a Genocide and Juice fan, and then I lost track a little bit. But that's what happens when you have kids. You start listening to like Barney and stuff, and you forget to listen to rap. So I was catching up on the shit I missed, and I said, sorry to bother you. And I was like, oh, this must be the soundtrack. It was like 2012.
Yeah. So
what's the deal?
I finished writing
the phrase that you love.
I finished writing the screenplay in early 2012, and then I was like, well, I need a way to get this known about, because I didn't know anybody in the industry. So I made the album be what I thought was going to be the soundtrack to the movie, and what was going to get publicity, that would get someone interested in helping me make it. And that was 2012, and that didn't work. and so then we toured that album and stuff, and then 2014, I ran into Dave Eggers, who is an author who also has.
He's a good friend of my sister's. I know Dave. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, he's a sick guy.
Yeah. And he has a publishing company called McSweeney's.
That's right.
And he put it out as its own paperback book, but in screenplay form, and went out to 10 or 20,000 people, and that got me.
Was this the same kind of time, like around 2012?
This is 2014 by this time, because you're a musician with a script. It's like, who wants to read that? I don't even want to read that. Like
so true.
It's the probably the thought is that the quality is suspect, maybe
100%. It happens no matter where you're at. I mean, even now with A Star Is Born, the big movie at the moment, people still are like, yeah, but it's Lady Gaga. Actually, it's an incredible performance. It's just, you just got to get over that idea that art is this singular thing,
Yeah. So and so 2014 comes, we do that. Then I put it out. Then I joined SF Film Society. Then got into the Sundance Writers Lab in 2015. Then 2016 got into the Directors Lab. And so by the time we're making it in 2017, I'm like, okay, that other album, one, it's already been out, it's old. And then as we make the film, the aesthetics of the film, the music that we made before don't match the aesthetics of the film. Yeah. And so I made a whole new album. And Interscope put it out, and they originally I was going to call it, because we talk about the sun exploding in the movie, so I was going to call it The Sun Exploding, but they were like, no.
Needs to be the name of the movie.
Needs to be the name of the movie. And so I'm like, so we have two out. We have Sorry to Bother You, and then Sorry to Bother You, the soundtrack.
And you can't call it Sorry to Bother You 2, because then that would be confusing, because the movie's called Sorry. Yeah. No, I felt the confusion on Apple Music just this morning. I felt it. Yeah. I was gonna ask about the significance of the phrase, but now I get it totally. I thought it was like this thing that you're really passionate about, but obviously it's just one of those things where it was just a messed up situation. You didn't get the thing out when you wanted it to get out. What I love about the whole story, though, is for anyone who's thinking, oh, well, he knows people in the industry, so he can make an album, then he can just make a movie. The breadth and length of the story that you've already told is a great lesson to anybody who wants to make something of their art. It's a long and painful sometimes journey.
And had I known that it would take this long, maybe there would be no movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's straight from the mouth of someone who wanted to be Prince in the space of 7 days as an 11-year-old.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated to know, I'd love to make a movie one day, but so I'm fascinated to know like that process once you've got to that stage where, you know, you got people interested in the script, you already had the script there, obviously may have needed some tweaking and whatnot. To get it from there to, you know, where we are right now, what were some of the biggest challenges?
Yeah, I mean, money is the biggest challenge. And that was able to happen through like basically the stone soup process, you know. You guys have that here, like you're telling people the stone soup tastes good and then somebody else puts something in there and you then tell people the broccoli in stone soup tastes good and then, you know. So I think right after I wrote it, David Cross and Patton Oswalt, who do the voices in the movie, they were on board.
Oh, they do the white voices.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew I recognized one of them. I realized he's the blue unicorn from Happy. That's what he is. That's a bit of an odd reference.
Yeah.
There's like a real fucked up series in the deep dark corners of Netflix with this drugged out dude, ex-policeman, who goes on a mission to try and find his kidnapped daughter because a fluffy blue unicorn tells him to.
Okay.
And that's an animated fluffy
David
blue
Cross
unicorn.
Or Patton Oswalt?
It's Patton Oswalt.
Okay.
And it's quite a performance.
That makes sense.
It's quite a series, guys. Check it out. It's called Happy. So you got these two guys on board, and this is an interesting selling point.
Yeah. Well, all it did was then started making people be like, oh, well, at least maybe it's funny. Right.
Yeah.
So I could start to get more people to click on the PDF because you could send it out. You could have somebody's email. You could, you know, but like getting them to read it, getting them to think it's important. I mean, because, yeah, like time is valuable. And who wants to read a musician's script? And so this says it's funny. So then once it got published in McSweeney's, and Dave Eggers was going around saying, publicly saying, this is one of the best unproduced screenplays I've ever read.
He published the whole thing.
Yeah, we published it. And I was told I had friends who, you know, wanted to be filmmakers, but were like making commercials and music videos, who were like, don't do that. You're not supposed to put the script out. But I knew through music, you do whatever you can. Like you do whatever you can. And so the rules were, well, now the script is going to be out to the public. Why are you going to do that? I'm going to do that because then 20,000 people know that I have a movie that I want to make.
Yeah.
And so they published it. And a guy from here drew the cover, Matt something. He draws all these.
Oh, I love Matt something.
Yeah. Anyway, he and so we put that out, and that made more people be like, okay, Dave Eggers likes this.
Yeah.
So then that made people respect it on like a different level
way as well. Yeah.
And then at some point, you know, a friend of mine was like, oh, you know Moshe? Yeah, I know Moshe. Yeah, Jordan Peele was at his wedding. So I was like, okay.
That's enough. That'll do.
So then I hit up Moshe. I was like, read this script. And he's a comedian, so I was like, David Cross, Patton Oswalt, you respect them, read it. And then and I said, so if you like it, send it to Jordan. Sent it to Jordan. A few days later, Jordan Peele was like, yo, I want to do this. And
he wanted to what, produce?
No, he wanted to play the lead.
Oh, and, for real?
Yeah. And he was like, I planned on not acting, but this will be my farewell piece. And so that got a lot of people excited.
I bet.
And combined with, then I got into the writer's lab and the director's lab, then people started having a little bit more confidence. Well, once you get into Sundance, you also use the idea. There's a myth that if you went to the Sundance labs and you make a good movie, that it will get into the festival. It's not true. But I'm one of the people that put forward that myth and made it more popular. Right. And so we were also attracting people with that. Sundance, this and that. And then Jordan wanting to do it made a lot of people start circling it. That was 2015. 2016, Jordan directs Get Out, calls me up, I don't want to act. and then he's like, but because at this time, like we're getting it so close to getting made, and I'm like, fuck, now what's gonna happen? And he's like, look, I'm not gonna leave you in the cold. Who do you want me to get in contact with for this? And I said, Donald Glover. So then Donald Glover's like, I want to do it. And
Denzel's like, fuck, I wanted to do that.
And then Donald Glover's like, well, the only thing is I might have this Star Wars thing. and then he got the call for it, and he was like, can you wait till after I do Star Wars and then after I do Atlanta season 2? And I was like, dude, the money might be gone. We might have a recession, a depression, like people pulling their money out, who knows? And he was like, cool, I feel it. He hung up the phone. 10 minutes later, because I got a call from Lakeith's manager, and he must have been standing in earshot of Donald hanging up the phone, and he was like, you need to meet with Lakeith. And at the time, there had only been 2 episodes of Atlanta out, and I hadn't seen them yet. I only knew Lakeith from Short Term 12, and then he was in Straight Outta Compton and in Dope. And, he's always playing like a high school student at this point. Yeah. And so I was like, man, that dude is too young. And, but his manager was persistent, said this is the one. And by this time we have people really excited about it, all that stuff, so I could go.
And you've retained the money? The money's still there? Well,
the money is still never surely there until you're filming.
Right,
but,
that's what I was going to say.
So I could go, I had a little bit of leeway because, maybe we could get, somebody big for Steve Lifter, so I could kind of have some leeway on the lead actor. And yeah, I met with Lakeith, and he seemed crazy enough. And he was wearing a beard, so he convinced me that he was not 15. and so that kind of all, but he wasn't known to the public. Like at the time when people were like, who are you gonna have play the lead? Now that Jordan's not doing it, I'm like, Lakeith Stanfield. People were like, who? And Get Out hadn't even been out yet, right? Yeah. So they were like, who? And I was like, have you ever seen Dope? Nope. Have you, all these things. Atlanta, like, yeah, the skinny dude. Oh, I love the skinny dude. So he was a skinny dude on Atlanta for a long time.
That can work.
But he was known to actors. He was known to other actors, and they knew how serious he was of an actor. So it sent up a flare to other actors that, okay, we heard about this crazy script, Sundance, all that kind of stuff, but we still don't know where's this dude going with this.
Yeah.
And that sent up a flare to them that this was a serious film. Like it might have comic aspects of it, but we were taking it serious.
Yeah.
And
clear.
And so I had written a letter to Tessa a year before, and she had not responded until after Lakeith came on.
Yeah. It's funny how one door opens another.
Yeah. And then then it just all kept happening. It was like the team building montage on a heist movie.
Love that. I know there's all sorts of moments in the movie, and we're not going to give any spoilers away here, but the bit that really touched me was that moment where Danny Glover says it's a voice that knows they've made it. It's a voice that feels safe. It's a voice that feels secure. It's a voice that doesn't have to worry what's around the corner. That really hit me hard, that moment. But it didn't stop it being creepy as fuck when I heard that voice come through. So you managed to retain the money somehow. I remember Barry Jenkins saying there was certain money he was scared of because he thought it was going to change the vision. How close are we to the original vision here? Because I never read, Dave never told me that he published the script and shit.
Yeah,
so
you know, if, like I brought up heist movie, if I had been like, I have a heist movie and it's a little different and it takes place in Idaho, then somebody would have been like, you know how heist movies work, right? You know, you got to have this thing in there because that's what that movie did and blah, 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 this and that. And you could say there is a perfect heist movie or a perfect base sports movie or something like that. There was no thing with this that they could say, this is close to this other thing that we know works. It was so out there that I was the authority.
Right. You
I was the authority on how to make this kind of movie.
Made a genre.
And so also the kind of people that we did get on board. Nina Yang, Bon Jovi, and Forrest Whitaker have a company called Significant, and they're
together. The three of them.
No, those are two people. Nina Yang, Bon Jovi. Yeah.
Oh, I was like Nina Yang, Forrest Whitaker, and the band Bon Jovi.
No, well, close.
Have a company.
She's
I need to invest.
Nina Yang is married to John Bon Jovi's
That makes a lot more sense
brother.
now. Yeah, thank you.
She's married to John Bon Jovi's brother, and she has a bunch of investors who they did Dope, and they made money off of that. They did Fruitvale Station. They made money off of that. They did Roxanne, made money off of that. So she was able to say, and I didn't know this until later, she was able to say to them, look, you don't need to read the script. You know, just trust me. You know, so the investors weren't really a problem as far as that was concerned.
That's amazing.
But I already had, I was part of the labs, and I know from doing music, like, you don't not take notes because you want people to react in a certain way. So it just, notes from investors are from a certain place of fear, right? As opposed to from someone else who's trying to
creatively make it better, like give you power, make it improve it and whatnot.
And so there, but I think, you know, one way that you know, if you read the McSweeney's version, there are a lot of long monologues that all sound really smart and show that I'm a great writer, and would be boring if they were in the film. And
they don't push the story forward necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it, you know, like some, I don't know, you like it really, that's a lot of what happened is shrinking that down. But yeah, sometimes it's hard for me to remember what things, where things were. It got crazier, I will say that. There are parts where it got it started moving along faster, but there are a few things in there that got a little bit crazier.
I think I'd agree with that.
No, I mean, than the original
script. Right, than the
Yeah,
original
yeah,
script.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Because if the original script was crazier, then I'm calling up Dave Eggers now to read that shit. All right, I think it's about time. You know, you've heard enough about rap. I'm sure you want to hear more about the movie. I'm sure you've thought up your own questions and queries for Boots. We've already got hands up. This fella down here in the light blue shirt.
I saw the film. I thought it was brilliant. And I felt like it said a lot of stuff. And you just said something about the white voice and how it's not like just how you sound, but maybe the entitlement and the other things that come with it. I related to a bunch of scenes, and the bit where everyone wants him to rap, it really...
Oh, that's painful.
It really hit me. And I just wondered, in a film that's got so much stuff in it, and you say a lot, is there any part of the film that you felt said exactly what you wanted, or what landed the most for you?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I only left in the stuff that said what I wanted. But the so many parts thing is part of what I'm saying as well, you know, like, I get tired of the movies that's that one thing. Oh yeah, we got this one thing, it's a great idea and it's funny and we're gonna stretch it out for 80 minutes, right? And you know, I wanted it to feel more like literature where, like, think of any great work of literature that you love. Tell me the one thing that it's about. And if you can, it's probably not that great of a piece of literature. You know, I wanted and it's not that I'm the first to attempt that, right? Like, there are movies by filmmakers that I love where I feel like they try to capture something that was in literature, and usually they try to do it through dialogue and story. And for me, I wanted those details to come out in different ways, in the production design, in the scenes, and you know, the other themes that I was alluding to through set pieces or whatever.
Like show and don't tell kind of thing.
Yeah, not only that, because there are things that come up, but there are things that come up in dialogue, but I'm not making it like literature by making their dialogue, you know, longer and,
sure,
you know, having storylines that come up only in the dialogue or something like that, you know. So I wanted it to feel syrupy, like a Toni Morrison book or Gabriel Garcia Marquez or something, you know, like to have some heft to all the things that were going to come at you. But definitely so many of those things are, you know, they're in there because they resonate with me. And so I wouldn't necessarily be able to pick out one scene in and of itself that I think is, you know, is more exactly what I wanted to say than others. So
pretty thorough. Sir?
Thank you. Yes, I've seen the film too. Thank you very much for it.
Thanks.
Closest to it, I suppose, in black cinema is Bamboozled. Anyway, the key point as a satire, you went to film school, you came out of, you said Spike came along and that suddenly made you think this is where you want to be. You've been through both the Sundance Labs. You spoke about your rap experience, and looking at the film today and listening to you today, the key question for me is, are you experimenting? Do you think you found your style? Free form, freestyle? The film is really funny. It's got a lot of politics in it, but the characters really speak to you. Tessa's character is fantastic. Okay, so do you feel that you've found where you want to go in cinema? You went to film school, or you're still looking to see where that might land? You mentioned in the comments you made about Spike's films and the work which you love, Malcolm X in particular, and there are certain tropes that he always has in movies. Is there something we can expect to see in your films in the future that will always have that spark and it's key to what you are?
Oh, I don't know yet. Yeah, I don't. You know, I have to keep it exciting for myself as well. So I don't know. You know, like yeah. I think I'm hopefully gonna keep trying to find my style through the whole time that I do film. You know, is there something where I'll signal like this is my film? I don't know. Yeah.
Are you with the second one yet? Are you developing it?
I'm writing a couple films right now. So yeah, I have deals to make films. So yes, and a TV show.
There you go. That's Boots's way of saying I knew some motherfucker was gonna mention Spike Lee. All right. The third hand I saw up was this lady with the glasses there.
I really like your film. It was brilliant. I just want to ask you, what were your comedic influences? I knew I was going to muck it up.
I mean, some of my comedic influences maybe aren't apparent in the film, but I think that's you know that's on purpose. I once had this drummer who was really young and an asshole, and but he was 17 when we brought him out. He's one of the most famous drummers out there right now. This kid Thomas Pridgen, And we took him out on his first tour, and we had to ask his grandmother. He was 17, and he had been like a child prodigy and like gospel drummer since he was 5 in that group ABC that was out in the 90s. Anyway, he was we were stuck in a van. You get stuck in a van with other musicians for 10 hours when you do music, so watch out. And he was one ride he was just listening to death metal the whole time, and I was like, oh man, what the fuck? I was like, dude, can we listen to some funk? We're playing funk. And he was like, Boots, man, I don't have to listen to the funk to play the funk. If I play it, it's the funk. I could be playing classical, I could be playing rock, I could be playing country, but because it comes through me, I'm the funk. And that's the time when the 17-year-old taught me something. Because you can have these influences, but the filter, once it comes through you, because of your experiences, because of what you do, it's going to have this filter on it that's going to put it through something else. So I just say that before I say some of the comedic influences, like, you know, one of my favorite films is Anchorman. I like all that Jody Hill stuff, like Foot Fist Way and Observe and Report and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Eastbound and Down, I don't know, like that sort of stuff. You know, there's older ones like Peter Sellers. Coen Brothers is like, that's kind of a way that I approach it, which is that, you know, and which is like why things are hilarious in life, because everything is serious, everything matters, it's important, but it's also hilarious as fuck. You know?
Yeah, I just thought there was some sort of elements of Monty Python in there as well. Like the
I like Monty Python, but I didn't see that. What are you talking about?
I just like stuff happening in the background, like surreal things that are happening, and it was just like crazy stuff I sort of picked. I didn't know whether that was something that maybe
I didn't consciously think of it, but yeah, I like Monty Python.
During the development years of you writing the film and trying to get it funded and stuff, what were you doing to sustain yourself at the time?
Well, up until early 2015, I was still doing shows and stuff. I think we did a show at Jazz Cafe in 2015, 2014, I'm not sure. And but then I got a grant from SF Film, a development grant, and then I started living off grants, and so doing that's been the odd show here and there, but yeah, that I became a filmmaker in residence with SF Film. And around the same time that I got accepted into the Sundance Writers Lab, we also got a grant from SF Film, and I used that. But I also didn't pay bills sometimes.
Smart.
So there was also being behind in rent for 10 months. 10 months late in rent, that sort of a thing. There was also electricity getting turned off, things like that. But I knew just from doing music that, you know, sometimes you have to be somewhat irresponsible to get your thing done. And I can't recommend that for anyone because then that would be me being irresponsible with your life. But the way that this whole system is set up is, you know, you have to spend so much time just surviving that you're not going to get this other stuff done. So, you know, if you're okay with going, you know, a few days with candles and, you know, or having a neighbor run electricity over to your house or something like that, or avoiding the landlord, you know, then filmmaking is for you.
That's real. That's real. That's real. Lady in the red hat, it is your time.
I'm really interested in your politics because I'm also a communist myself. And I imagine as a communist, you might receive like backlash and ostracization from celebrities in social circles. So my question is that, like, have you ever, or do you ever dilute your politics to reassure others around you?
You know, I think one part of the question is, one time when I was on tour, we had our Tom Morello. I have a band with Tom Morello. He had his guitar tech on, was on tour, and his guitar tech's brother comes onto the bus, and he's got tattoos all over his face. And the guitar tech is like, it's his little brother, so he's like, "You understand what you're doing, right? You know, you're gonna be unemployed. Like, what are you doing? You're not gonna be able to get a job. You're gonna be unemployed." And his brother said, "It's not about being unemployed. It's about being unemployable." And so much of what I do is putting that tattoo on my face so that there's no way for me to go back, even if I was tempted to, right? There's no way for me to dilute it. I've been saying I'm a communist since I was 15, and putting it in record, and, you know.
Would you say you're a Marxist-Leninist?
Yeah, I read Marx, and Marx is one of the reasons that people made all these revolutions. And I think sometimes people call themselves a Marxist so that they don't say they're a communist, like, because it sounds a little bit more academic. I'm a Marxist professor, right? You can get a job with that. Right. But but you know, so yeah, I study what people have written, and I think that the future is still being written, obviously. And so I don't disagree with any of those things, but what I believe that the teams that we need to make in order to change the world are still being formed. And so some of the signifiers that we use are all about putting the teams into different sects. But I would say this, that the truth is that in the United States, there was a survey done by a right-wing think tank, and Harvard came up with a similar survey that said the same thing, but the right-wing think tank is funnier because they were up in arms at the results of the survey that they did. They surveyed 4,200 millennials in the United States and found that 51% of them said they would rather this be a socialist society, right? So the point is that, you know, I'm one reason I'm not afraid to be being ostracized is because most of the people know that capitalism is fucked up, right? And, you know, there's a certain part of my film that's like, duh, right? But why hasn't it been in film all this time? I mean, class struggle has been happening throughout our whole lives, throughout, you know, many generations, and many films take place in a workplace. Many people are going through economic struggles in the workplace, or just in the film, I mean. And somehow, usually just struggle of any kind is taken out, you know? Like, what's that movie that was made in Britain, Never Let Me Go, right? Like, they go to school, and what's happening here? Why are we at this special school? Oh, wait, we're organ farm, you know, we're gonna get killed, or they're getting eaten or something like that. We're getting eaten. And then they're like, what can we do? Well, we heard if we fall in love that maybe they'll have mercy on us. And we fell in love, please have mercy on us. Oh, they're not gonna have mercy on us. Oh, well, the end.
There you go.
And
it's not a bad review.
You know, And there's nobody in that whole world fighting back. Not even happening in the background. Like maybe you don't want maybe that's the story for your characters, but it's not happening in the background. It's not even part of a human emotion to fight back in many movies. Like so much so that part of why my movie is called Weird is because people are fighting back. But and it's so different than what really happens in real life that people have had to edit it out of their screenplays. And what they put in are all these things that keep happening over and over in movies that don't really happen in real life. Like, I've never had a noontime cafe date. And I've never witnessed that. But that's in every fucking movie. Where they got, like, oh, we had a noontime cafe day. That doesn't happen. But people are just like, oh, these people have to talk. Here's a thing that happens in other movies. And we write these cliches and we tend towards cliches because in our mind, what the world is not what we've been experiencing, but it's what we've seen in other movies. Right? Like, think about someone writing a breakup song or a breakup scene. It's rarely going to be anything like any breakup you've ever had. Because, and if you thought about, well, maybe I could just transcribe that breakup, it would be like, oh, that's not cinematic. Why? Because it doesn't follow the cliches that we've already seen, and because it doesn't feel as real. We think this other thing is normal, and people are just repeating cliches. And one of those cliches that's affected, that comes from, the system that creates the films, is that people don't engage in class struggle.
Fucking hell. All right. Ladies and gents, I really wanted to get more of your questions out, but Bruce, as you can appreciate, is a fascinating dude with a lot to say. So we're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming out. I hope you enjoyed the movie. Big thank you to the one and only Bruce Riley.
Thank you.